resist the urge to deliver quick wins from the beginning. Everyone who starts a new position wants to show that they can deliver something. And it's very difficult for someone who is driven not to do that. In the first 90 days, maybe 4 months, you are the newbie. So you have that card that you can always say, I didn't know, I don't know, I'm listening, I'm observing. But if you jump into quick wins and you fill your calendar with that, then you come back after 6 months and you say, oops, I didn't do this and I didn't understand that, I'm going back. You cannot play that joker card anymore.
Welcome to the C-Suite Transitions and Succession series, where we explore how CEOs, business owners, and boards can de-risk new hires and support their transitions into new roles for maximum impact and performance. Today we have Delel Chaabouni. Welcome, Delel.
Thank you, Maria.
Delel is an executive coach and C-suite advisor with over 28 years of experience across continents and industries. Delel is a professional certified coach by the International Coaching Federation, a certified family business advisor by the Family Firm Institute, a certified chair by the Advisory Board Center, and held various roles in various multinationals. Today, she works with boards and C-suite executives through high-stake transitions. So, how do you feel, Delel?
Yeah, good. Thank you. Very good introduction.
Thank you very much. And I want to start asking you that you went from being a chief information officer leading large-scale digital transformation to becoming an executive coach. What was the moment that you realized that the biggest problems that executives face aren't technical, they are human?
That's a good question, actually. And to be fair, I think it was just before I was executive coach. It started with the move from being an individual contributor to having to lead teams. And I think that's where I realize, and I think everyone realizes, that dealing with people is a little bit different than dealing with the time I was a computer science dealing with systems. They are much easier just because of, the difference that people bring. They're different. So, you have to learn how to lead people, how to delegate, how to set the vision, how to inspire them, how to influence them. And I can see it now, as you say, with the coaching. These are the kind of leadership problems that my clients come with, right? So because they either they're moving the ladder, and then the responsibility of people becomes higher, and so it becomes much more complex for them to talk about influence, to learn how to set the strategy, how to inspire, how to be more assertive, and what kind of stance they need to take with different people. So that was, as I said, not only from a coaching perspective, but as you grow as a leader in the organization and your responsibility for people becomes higher.
I remember I met you, it was a team coaching certification, and you were still this chief information officer of a very multinational company. And I remember the examples that you used to bring in the class. It was all of us, more or less, we were coach, and you were in a different position, that it was very inspiring, bringing all the examples that you had from the teams that you were leading across the continent. And I still remember the examples, be honest.
And to be fair, I started coaching as well in parallel, in parallel to my CIO career. And I was lucky enough to work with multinationals that were believing in coaching. And given the fact that I was interested in coaching, I actually started coaching in parallel to my CIO position and other positions I built as well. I have developed this passion for people, And so I wanted to be involved. And I think for every leader, any coaching skills would be coming handy as for them to, to lead with that modality of coaching wherever appropriate.
There was recently, I read a research from Handling Struggles that 40% of executives are push out, fail, or quit within the 18 months. Most people assume there is a competence story, correct? You say it isn't. So walk us through what is happening here.
Yeah, I think from a recruitment and selection process, there is a thorough, in most of the times, there is a thorough interviewing process and assessment process to make sure that the person is bringing the right competency skills to the role I would say from a technical perspective. But there are things that the selection process cannot identify, and these are coming out in the first months. Now, if you look at most companies, at best, they have a 90 days onboarding plan, and that's mostly logistical. It's like you get your laptop, you understand the policies in the organization, you know how much leave you have your health insurance, probably a life insurance as well. And they tell you how the system works at a high level. In the best of the organization, they might actually set some meetings to meet people, right? But I think what's undervalued is that first, that transition takes more than 90 days. And second, it's everything else that actually is important. So I'm just going to talk about the 5 C's. So first of all, the context, understanding, the situation of the organization, how do they, what's their interaction with government, society, and so on. Some of these things someone could prepare beforehand, before joining, but there's a lot to understand once you start in the position. The second thing, which is big, is the culture. And, the culture is not something that someone is going to give you some PowerPoint slides and explain what the culture is, right? So it's everything what is spoken but unspoken as well. And then you have, try to understand the confidence, that, the engagement of the employees, how engaged are they, the DNA of the leadership teams. You have the commitment. So how much is the organization committed to its clients, to its customers, to society? And last but not least, as well, the circles of influence. Generally, we think, we get the organizational structure and that's it. But there is so much of the power of influence without having the authority that you would not know if you are not in the organization. So, and I think, you might actually start learning some of these things in the first 90 days. But we do recommend, for instance, I do a lot of executive transition coaching that we accompany actually the clients throughout the year. We might start with more coaching sessions at the beginning and maybe once a month after, just to make sure that all of these elements are being looked at and not forgotten.
I totally agree with you. I mean, from my HR perspectives, it was always pushing the line managers to go beyond the technical competencies, to check ask questions and be curious about the culture, the dynamics of the team, the engagement. And what you're saying, it makes sense that especially at the C-suite level. So my next question is about the cost. The cost of a failed executive transition is estimated, they say, at around 6 to 12 times the individual's annual salary. So beyond the financial number, what does a failed transition cost an organization that doesn't show up in that figure?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because generally people look at the financials, but when a person leaves, you still have to hire someone else. So you have the gap, right? And that, that leads to probably some initiatives going slower than needed. That leads to people not knowing, or the employees, the teams not knowing which direction they need to follow. Maybe at the best case, there is someone else who is taking over an extra responsibility on top just to bridge the gap until someone else comes in. The employees need to get used to a new style because everyone has his or her own style when they come to the organization. And that's without counting, because sometimes the person doesn't make it in the first 18 months. They might actually bring in some toxic cultures or, have a derailer from that perspective. So that might cost the organization to lose good people when they are under the leadership of this kind of person. So there is the cost of losing people as well, right, in the way. And so that's why it's extremely important to try to de-risk these kind of hires and make sure to have some support to support them through that transition so that, you don't have to come up with these high costs or the other areas that we just discussed and make sure that their transition is successful, right?
Yeah. So let's say that when executives are promoted from within their identity, internally, is often what derails them at the enterprise level. I mean, what do we mean by that?
I think you brought a good point, because when we talk about transition, we think that it is going to a new company and a new role. What I hear you say is someone who is being promoted from within.
Yeah.
And we always say, you're hired for what you knew and you're going to be fired for what you are. So you see, there's an identity shift in that sentence. Many people, think that they know everything when they are being promoted. Yes, they might know the culture of the organization. Yes, they might know some people that they related to. But remember, they're being promoted. So that's a higher level, right? So they're being asked to actually deliver on a higher level. So they need to actually show their influencing capabilities at an enterprise level. They might need to align with the peers that they have at that level, which are not the same as before. Their higher management is going to change, right? They might actually be reporting to the CEO or to the board now. And that kind of influencing skills is also different in terms of managing up. And so I think there are a few things that people can do wrong, particularly when they move from a very functional role to a more of a higher leadership role. It's not about solving problems. It's more about building a team of problem solvers. It's not about, it's about delegating the right way, and it's not about measuring the, the performance by output, but more by influence, because you need to align people to follow you on your strategy, on your initiatives. So, there's an identity shift, and we work with that as well. So everyone who actually gets promoted he or she had a brand before. He needs to look at his or her brand positioning based on the new role. And so it's important to know the gaps and to address those so that the perception of other people changes as well, believing that that person is able to do that job.
Yeah, it's very important what you mentioned, because there is a gap. Because when you are within and you are successful and people knows you and likes you, it doesn't mean that you have all this that you mentioned, that you will be successful at C-level, or even worse, undertake global or regional position that you need to influence people at different level. You need to empower different teams. You are out of the environment that you are working in. So thank you for sharing. It was an amazing comment, Delel. So another question that I have with you is that when a new executive join, let's say a C-suite team, there is always an unspoken question among the peers. Are you going to be here to collaborate or to compete? So how do you advise executives to answer that question through their behavior? And especially you mentioned this first 30, the first 90 days, you mentioned it before.
Yeah, I think it's not only the first 90 days. I think it's continuous. And when there is a new hire in the organization, particularly in the C-suite, obviously the other ones that are there are going to be cautious. Is this person going to have a different relationship with the CEO? Are they going to bring change? What change are they? So there is that, as you say, is that person going to compete, or are they going to be aligned with us? And I have a very good example. I had actually coached an executive in a big tech company. She was in a global position. And I think we started the coaching when she was already 6 months there. She was highly regarded by her direct, manager. She was, her team loved her already in the first 6 months. She had the right strategy, which was, approved by her executive manager. And, but her initiative stalled. She couldn't get through. Now, it was the right one. And then when we actually started the coaching, we did a personality assessment, came out that she's on the social side. She's a bit more introvert. She wouldn't go out of her lane. She prefers to deliver. And in our discussions, it came out that she hadn't actually spent time to get to know her peers who held some of the resources to get that initiative off the ground, right? And so what happened is that these peers were not aligned.
Okay.
Even if it was not clear or spoken about, obviously they were resisting that initiative. So what we did is we worked on a stakeholder map. We worked on an outreach plan, and she started getting to know her peers better. After a few months, that initiative was extremely successful because then they were supporting her. They were aligned. And so what I say is to people who are starting a new position is, first of all, research who your peers are, even before starting if you can. Second thing is try to listen. If you have meetings, and you should at the beginning meeting everyone, listen to their agendas. What moves them? What motivates them? What do they have on their agenda? Try to find shared priorities. And then once you decide, try to align and try to have first wins that you can share as well with your peers. Remember, this is all about trust. So you need time to build that trust. And peers are the most difficult in general because team, of course, you have the authority in some sense. Your direct manager, you have the one-on-one. The peers are in general the most difficult to get on your side. And that's why it's important to spend enough time getting to know them, their priorities, and build that strategy on how you are going to build that coalition with those peers. Also say the peers that are the most difficult are the ones that you need most on your side. So you need to really play that very well as well. And that goes, as I said, beyond the 90 days. I think the 90 days are good for listening and getting to know them. But as you start collaborating with them, it goes beyond that. So I would say a good year is a good time to get to know them.
So I'm hearing that understanding and start building relationship with peers, it's very important, and maybe it's a very success point for CEOs and C-level people to be aligned and have successes with performance within the organizations.
Yes, correct. It's extremely important. I mean, look, it's not only about peers. I think it's important to build a stakeholder map. There's going to be different people you need to connect with. You asked me about the peers, so I answered about the peers, but they are all important. And I think you need to look at it from a 360-degree perspective. And exactly, and think about your influencing style as well for different contexts.
Very interesting, huh? And now we go into the culture, because now the discussion it leads to culture. So culture is one of the most cited reasons for executives derailment. Yet it's also one of the hardest things to diagnose from the outside. So what signals do you teach executives to read, and how early can they be spotted?
Yeah, as you said, I also think that the culture is the biggest derailer, and the most difficult to spot, as you said, because you don't get the PowerPoint presentation about culture in the organization, right? So I think it's key to observe and listen. So the spoken, the unspoken, the written, the unwritten, all of these contribute to the culture. And if I had to say, it's how people behave, how they take decisions beyond the organization structure and the authority, and beyond how decisions are being made, beyond the policies and so on. Who gets promoted? Who gets punished and how? Who gets rewarded and what's the rewarding system? So these are signals to look at. So if you ask me, what I do recommend and how we work as well with people is when they get into a new position is I say just make sure that you watch for these signals when you meet with people, when you hear things, because there is a difference between what's happening and what's written, and you need to be able to depict, and that's the culture that you are going to see as well. And it takes time. It takes time as well to understand the culture of an organization. But it's definitely one of the biggest derailers in when you start in a new role.
I totally agree with you. And we have seen in the past many successful CEOs that they are sitting in one company, and when they are going even in the same industry, CEO in another organization or in another region, they failed. And the reason that they fail is not because they don't know how to do things. It's because of the culture. They don't fit.
Yes. Yeah. You're bringing a good point, because then you talk about the country culture and so on, which plays a role. Obviously, here we are in the Middle East, so it's pretty much mixed. We have different nationalities coming into one table. And so what is the organization doing about its culture, and what's the organization culture on top of everyone's culture? And that comes to two things. One, combined, is the culture of the organization, and then understanding the people that we talked about before.
Yes. Thank you, Delel. And as a final question, and for our viewers, if you could give every new C-suite executive one non-negotiable action to take before their first day in their role, what it will be?
Resist the urge to deliver quick wins from the beginning. And why I'm saying that, because, and I know it's an urge, because everyone who starts a new position wants to show that they can deliver something. And it's very difficult for someone who is driven not to do that. Now, I say that because you have a joker card at the beginning when you start a new role is in the first 90 days, maybe 4 months, you are the newbie. So you have that card that you can always say, I didn't know. I don't know. I'm listening. I'm observing. I'm not going to take the lead now. But if you jump into quick wins and you fill your calendar with that, then you come back after 6 months and you say, oops, I didn't do this and I didn't understand that. I'm going back. You cannot play that joker card anymore because people will say, well, you've been here. You should know, right? Now, you can tell me, oh, look, it's a luxury. It's a luxury that someone gets 3 months or 4 months just listening and observing. Sometimes the CEO or the direct manager says you need to deliver fast and you need to at least. Then I would say, okay, pick 1 or 2 things, not too many, and keep your calendar still open for the onboarding, for proper understanding, the context, the culture, the people, knowing your peers, and so on, while you are delivering these quick wins, because you will not have that time later on. So that would be my advice.
Yeah. Listening and be curious. I am hearing.
Listening, be curious. As we said, see for the unspoken, the spoken, observe, onboard yourself the proper way. Yeah.
Thank you, Delel. We had a very interesting and very powerful conversation. And thank you all for listening to us in a conversation on C-suite transitions.
Thank you.